Department of Home Affairs has been taken to court for failing to register births on time. About 250,000 people have been waiting for several years to get their late birth registration applications processed. Joining us now is Cecile van Schalkwyk. She's a senior attorney at the Legal Resource Centre. Cecile, thanks very much for your time and for your patience this afternoon. I mean, for children to go through life this way without a birth certificate for many, many years, it's almost like living in a country where you are stateless.
Absolutely. I mean, I think if anyone thinks about all the things that they do with, their ID or their birth certificate in a day, trying to access school, getting access to, for example, social grants, being able to write matric, accessing health services, opening a bank account, getting a cell phone, all of those things are denied especially when a child who's vulnerable do not have access to their birth certificates.
So why does it take so long? Essentially, why do we not have the resources to expedite things like birth certificates, especially when it comes to late registration?
I mean, I think that the answer to that is probably quite complex. So just to clarify also for listeners, generally births in South Africa are registered within the first 30 days after the child is born. However, for various reasons, often quite understandable, sometimes people don't take the steps to have the child's birth registered within the first 30 days, and the child's application then becomes a late application for birth registration. Unlike in the first 30 days, there's a few more documentary and procedural requirements that seems to be imposed when it becomes a late birth registration. And what we found is that especially in the Western Cape, where the majority of the clients we're representing in this matter emanate onerous. So, for example, contrary to what the legislative framework provides, there is a requirement, for example, that Home Affairs in the Western Cape imposes that they have to do interviews with the people applying, for the caregiver or the parent, whoever is applying on behalf of the child. Those interviews, there's a massive backlog for those interviews. They, like I said, they're not a legal requirement necessarily, but that certainly is a clog in the process that's making it's taking much longer. It should also be noted that these applications are not centrally managed at a national level, but they are paper-based, managed at the local offices. Which seems to make it a high burden that Home Affairs places on itself to try and verify documentation that is submitted by the applicants. There's challenges, for example, when a child is born in one province and then applies for a birth certificate in another province. We've seen instances where Home Affairs have said, sorry, you've got to go back to your province of application, your province of birth to go and apply there. So there seems to be quite a lot of sort of procedural, instances that creates this backlog. But I think in general, there's also just been sort of a failure to address it. I mean, this backlog has been coming for many, many years. It seems like there doesn't seem to be any urgency on the side of Home Affairs to try and eradicate the backlog and to really allocate resources and time and effort to it and to think about whether the system they've imposed to deal with these sorts of applications works. Is it favoring the child? Is in the best interest of the children that are caught in this backlog?
Yeah, and when we ask the question, why would a birth not be registered within 30 days? Some of the reasons are that these babies might be born in rural areas, sometimes where the cultural practice is to remain at home for up to 3 months. So that might be one reason. Many mothers themselves don't have IDs because they are having children at a young age, perhaps, and they hadn't applied for an ID. They also might be victims of this late registration system. And I wonder what the argument from Home Affairs would be then, Cecile, on why we can't take this system and make it paperless, why we can't take it to an online portal.
I mean, your guess is as good as mine. Unfortunately, in this litigation, the Department of Home Affairs haven't filed answering papers, so we have no idea what their argument is going to be in response to this. They're late in filing their answering papers, so we are in the process of trying to compel them to do so. So yeah, it would be very interesting to see exactly what the reasoning is. I think there is, just from what we've picked up from our clients on ground level, there does seem to be quite a high level of suspicion surrounding these sorts of applications, and Home Affairs want to really, really double down on making sure that people aren't, that they're not trying to deceive the system. But I mean, I can tell you from the experience of the clients we're representing in this case, they are vulnerable people, often from rural areas, often really, really vulnerable children who some have applied 7 years ago and are still waiting for their applications to be decided.
Yeah, and just the general slow pace of the system at Home Affairs, no matter where you're sort of approaching the Home Affairs office, what document it is that you needed. One example that came out of the Eastern Cape last week during the floods was of a mother who was able to evacuate her children safely from their home, but she went back for their ID documents. And she was swept away in the floods. And it just gives you some sense of the kind of desperation that comes with these documents, losing them, and having to go through the system to reapply.
Yeah. Absolutely, absolutely. And I mean, I think that one of the challenges with the system, the late birth registration system, is that, both the Children's Institute, who is our institutional client in this matter, and I'm, the Legal Resources Centre ourselves, we believe that, of course, it's in the child's best interest for the child to be registered within the first 30 days. And because that's really one thing that Home Affairs pushes, and it's important, right? But people's lived realities don't always reflect the rules and the regulations of Home Affairs. And this late birth registration process is there for a reason, because we are cognizant of the fact that people's lives, might be influenced, as you say, by a natural disaster, and they don't have their correct documents to go and submit to Home Affairs for an application, or, cultural practices, money, the ability to access offices of Home Affairs. There's lots of factors that can play into this. And therefore it's incredibly important that Home Affairs comes up with a system that can expedite and deal with these sorts of applications.
Yeah, it's particularly ironic that Home Affairs hasn't given its replying documents yet. Cecile, let me thank you for your time. Cecile van Schalkwyk is a senior attorney at the Legal Resources Centre.